Hello. In this video, we are going to get some of the buttons and text boxes working. So we are going to do that in the JavaScript, but it's important to identify what these elements are in our HTML so we can connect to them in our JavaScript here. So those text boxes that are right there, they are inputs and they have IDs with guess, and then the other one has an ID with the wager. Then this other one is just a button, so we wouldn't necessarily have to give it an ID. Um, but once we start to add more buttons, then we should. Um, so it probably would be a good practice to do that. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is take this button right here um, and give it an ID equal to quotes. I guess theoretically I could just say the word guess again because it'd be a button as opposed to an input, but I'm going to call it, uh, maybe I'll call it guess BTN, standing for guess button. Just making up a name here. That way it's different from this ID up here. You should never reuse the same ID over and over again. Now, if you feel like there's something you'd like to repeat over and over again, that's actually an attribute called class. So you could give a class to multiple things. That way you could do that in the CSS or in JavaScript even. But the concept with IDs is that they should always be unique. So I'm going to call this guess BTN for button here. All right, so now they all have something I can identify them with. So the checkpoints in this part are by the end, we want it to be that when I click on the button, something happens. And that what happens is that I know what my guess is. Um, and we can kind of go from there. All right, so I'm going to go over to the JavaScript. It's just called sketch.js because the JavaScript is what makes the page interactive. Now, these elements are in the HTML, so I, in some way, need to, in a sense, import them into the JavaScript here. So I'm going to make a bunch of variables because that's part of the trick. I always need variables to work with. So to make a variable, so const, um, let's say guess. How about guest box? That's going to be slightly different. So guest box is equal to. And then the way that we grab things from the page is document dot query selector parens. That's a function. So inside of there, we give a string for basically a CSS selector for what the thing is. So it's an input with the ID of guess. And I called this guess box because there's a difference between the actual guess itself and the guess box. Uh, the guess is like a number, and the guess box is the input box and everything. All right, so we have more things that we have to bring in here. Might as well get the wager box. So wager box is equal to, and it's the same phrase, document.query selector parens quotes. Then that's an input with the ID of wager. Notice how I use the pound sign for the ID there. Then I have the const guess button, a BTN, is equal to document dot query selector parens quotes, and then that was a button with the ID of guess BTN. All right, so I have my three elements that I really care about selected. I guess the only other one are the results, but not fully. I can come back and do that in the next video, I think. All right, so just the point that I want to get to in this video is that something happens with the button. I'm just going to try to console log in log it into the console there. But the first thing is I need to attach an event listener, a click listener to the button. So I just do this way. Take the guess btn, that button, and say guess btn dot on click, establish the on click property to be equal to, and then some arrow function. So parens, arrow, curly braces. That way, and now it's going to be attached to that button. So when anytime anybody clicks on it, this function is going to happen. So what I want to do is just do a console.log, whatever they typed into the guess box. So first thing is I need to actually get what they typed into the guess box. So I'm going to make I think const might work for now. I'll see if I have to change that out to let later. So const guess is equal to, you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and say let, 'cause it definitely over time is gonna be different. Um, I could maybe, yeah, so I'm just gonna use let. So let guess equal to, well, it definitely comes from the guess box, like that's the variable that helps me right now. But it's guess box dot value in particular. The value is what's inside that input box right there. Um, so that's just gonna pull it out and give me the guess. And then in the meantime, I just want to say console.log guess. Hopefully this actually happens, that when I click on the button, something shows up in the console down here. I'm just testing that the button clicking works. All right, so if I run the code, if I type something in here, and there we go, it shows up in the console. All right, so we see that this clicking is actually happening. It's getting the correct value. It's getting what's in the box. So we are in the right direction.